Well, good afternoon, friends. We will have this lecture today. It will be a tutorial come assignments to offer to those who are interested in doing them. So far we have given lectures on the inelastic neutron scattering to study periodic dynamics, and also quasi-elastic neutron scattering to study stochastic dynamics. And in the previous lecture, I gave details of the molecular dynamics simulation, previously of also the lattice dynamics methods. So we'll just quickly revise a little bit of the course and then come to the various problems that I would like to address today. Okay, this is again just to remind you the various scales of energies and time and so on that we are that neutron scattering can address. So as far as periodic excitations are concerned, we are able to look at energies in the range of 0 to 200 milli-electron volts, because these are the energies that the thermal neutrons have. And so we can ideally study these excitations. And of course, the actual energies depend on the strength of the interatomic, so on and so forth. Now, these energies related to the typical phonon frequencies. So the energies, this is a scale. I mean, if you have a frequency of 1 terahertz, which corresponds to an angular frequency of 2 pi terahertz, then if you multiply with the h cross, then you get an energy of, and convert into electron volt units, then you get the corresponding energy is about 4 milli electron volt. Okay, so that is corresponding to 1 terahertz, and as you can easily see, this would correspond to about a 1 picosecond of the period of oscillation. Okay, expressed in terms of centimeter inverse units, which are more common with the optical experiments like Raman scattering. So essentially all you do is divide the frequency by the velocity of light, and so this corresponds to 33 centimeter inverse. So these are the conversions amongst the different units, and that is corresponds to scattering. Stochastic dynamics, on the other hand, have given a general name diffusion, but is stochastic dynamics of any kind, which involves times of any kind of correlation functions between of the atoms or between the atoms. And so if you have a relaxation time of 1 picosecond, then its Fourier transform would correspond to an angular frequency of 1 terahertz. See the contrast there. That was the frequency of the excitations. Here it is just the Fourier component. So 1 picosecond of relaxation time corresponds to 1 terahertz of angular frequency, and therefore the energy that is involved here is 2 pi times smaller, so it's 0.6 milli-electron volt. Okay, so once again, these energies are small compared to the thermal neutron energies, and therefore you need relatively high resolution spectrometers to measure these. However, excellent high resolution spectrometers have been made over the last, I would say, almost 50 years that neutron scattering has been a very, very useful tool. So during this 50 years, spectrometers which offer resolutions down to 0.001 milli-electron volt or about 1 microvolt onwards are available. And these can address polymer reactions which are for which relaxation times are of nanosecond. Okay, atomic jumps take a much larger time of a few picoseconds, and so this would be a little larger energy. There are also further slower processes which can go to even further larger energies, and that is all possible. There are a variety of spectrometers which cater to different energy ranges, right from 1 microelectron volts to 100 to 200 or more milli-electron volts. Okay, so the one phonon, the inelastic neutron scattering from a single crystal, the main problem that we addressed was of one phonon excitations, and the neutron scattering cross sections are proportional to what we call the dynamical structure factor, which is a function of the wave vector transfer and the of the neutron. So whatever is the change in the wave vector of the neutron and the change in the wave vector of the change in energy is h cross times omega, the energy of the neutron. So the corresponding, that is the cross section. This corresponds to coherent scattering. We studied in coherent and incoherent scattering. Neutrons have two kinds of scattering lengths for any atom, depending on the atom itself, whether it has several different nuclear spin states or different isotopes in a given material. There is a disorder among these states of the scattering length that gives an incoherent scattering length, the variation, and the average value of the scattering length gives you the coherent scattering. So the coherent scattering dynamical structure factor corresponding to measure the one phonon excitations is like this. It has a structure factor which depends only on the structure of the material and another energy dependent terms. So obviously it's proportional to what is the population of phonons and certain other factors. And this just gives a conservation of the wave vector and the energy or momentum on the energy. Okay. Energy loss and neutron energy gain, which have slightly different cross sections. Okay, so in the measurements, these are relatively trivial factors which can be taken care easily. But the most important part is in selectively studying phonons is that we have to look at the one phonon structure factor, which depends on the structure of the atoms inside the solid. So here, this depends crucially on how the phonon eigenvector is aligned with respect to the wave vector transfer. Phonon eigenvector just gives the displacements of atoms during the phonon vibration. So if the atomic displacements are parallel to the wave vector transfer, they give a good cross section because there's a dot product involved between two vectors. It's a vector dot product. And any displacement of atoms which is perpendicular to the wave vector transfer will not contribute to the scattering. Okay, this is the neutron scattering length. This is the Debye-Wonder factor. So this essentially means how atoms are from their equilibrium positions, which give the coherent scattering. Larger the amount of vibrations, the structure becomes, the coherent scattering reduces by the corresponding Debye-Wonder factor. It's the same factor that you encounter when you write the structure factor for the diffraction. Okay, in case of diffraction, and this is just the phase factor. So how it is different from a diffraction structure factor is that you have these two terms, but you don't have this term. This is the phonon term, one phonon term, which modifies the diffraction structure factor. If you ignore it, then you get the diffraction structure factor. And so this is, and you can see that for acoustic phonons, when all the atoms have very similar displacements in phase, and so therefore this term would be similar for all the atoms, and once this term is similar for all the atoms, the one phonon structure factor is rather similar to the Bragg or diffraction structure factor. So which means that the acoustic phonons can be more easily measured wherever you have a good Bragg structure factor around of the reciprocal lattice vectors. And for optic phonons, it's the other way. Quite often you will find that the phonons which have a weak or small structure factors will give you large scattering for optic phonons. Okay, these are, so now the problem number one, we already solved it during one of the previous tutorial sessions. But now I'm giving you this all these problems today. There will be 8 problems. So please take them as assignment. We will discuss them today. But those of you who are interested in getting the credit from this HBNI course should solve this, and as you have been instructed, kindly submit those. So this problem is very simple. Assuming that the wavelength of the incident neutron is 1 angstrom, and there is a phonon that we. So I've purposely given different unit. So you need to convert into the proper units. And so if you convert all the incident neutron wavelength into incident neutron energy, and the phonon also in the same units of say milli-electron volts, then it's easy to see the energy of the outgoing neutron. It will either get. So if this energy is, for example, as it will turn out, is about 80 milli-electron, this is about 4 milli-electron volts. So the outgoing neutron should have an energy of either 80 minus 4 or 80 plus 4, so either 76 or 84, that kind of numbers. And please correspondingly convert into the wavelength units. So that will be simple. And moreover, if the scattering angle between Ki and Kf, that is scattering angle, is 90 degree, then please also find out what is the wave vector transfer, which is nothing but vector Q equal to vector Ki minus vector Kf. Okay, so this we all did in previous lectures, but if you actually write it down, then you would appreciate these concepts easily. Okay, next, another problem that we had already done. So we are, I'm just giving you as an assignment. The monochromator, assume that you have a monochromator, which is one plane, and assume that the lattice constant is a cubic structure, so the lattice constant is just 4 angstrom. Then you need to, I'm interested in getting, if this is 4 angstrom and this is the monochromator, and if I want to choose my incident neutron energy from the monochromator as 20 milli-electron volts or 80 milli-electron volts, what is the resolution that I'll be able to get? Okay, you please assume here, I have not given it here. So the resolution also depends on what is the angular divergence of the beam. So assume an angular divergence of just 1 degree, okay, and calculate this quantity, what is dE IVDI. Okay, as a hint, you can actually derive it that this quantity is nothing but 2 cot theta d theta, where theta is the Bragg angle, and d theta is the divergence of the beam, of the neutron beam. And the same would apply to the scattered neutron energies. Here you're given the analyzer as parallelitic graphite with 002 reflection, and you may assume the lattice constant equal to 7 angstrom and do the same problem. Okay, so this we had done earlier, and you can now just redo it corresponding to these different cases. All right, the third problem also, which we had done in the previous tutorial. So this is also, we have to calculate what is the structure factor for diffraction and what is the structure factor for 1 phonon scattering. So this is what we are referring to. This is structure factor for 1 phonon scattering. And you please do it for a sodium chloride structure that you know that it has a face-centered cubic structure. Okay, and so you know where the atoms are. Sodium is at say origin 000, chlorine is at half of the face-centered cubic structure. And so there are 2 atoms, and you will need to assume what is the coherent scattering length. You don't have to take the exact numbers, just roughly assume that B for sodium is 2. These are not correct numbers, okay? This is only for the assignment. So please don't use these numbers for any other purpose, only for the assignment. This is the main idea to give this number, is that these 2 numbers are actually different. Okay, if they were same, then the structure actually would appear quite different to neutrons. So these, and so for the diffraction, you can get it using just the structure. For the 1 phonon structure scattering structure factor, Please do it for longitudinal acoustic, transverse acoustic, longitudinal optic, and longitudinal transverse optic. Is 4 different phonons at the wave vector, which is near the Brillouin zone center. Okay, it cannot be exactly at the center, because if it were exactly, because the longitudinal and transverse are defined with respect to the direction of the phonon wave vector. Okay, so the phonon wave vector is along the, say, the x direction, and therefore the longitudinal modes will have the displacements along the x direction, whereas the transverse mode will have displacements which are perpendicular to the x direction. Okay, and you need to do it for the 4 reciprocal lattice vectors G, which is 2, 0, 0, 4, 0, 0, 1, 1, 1, and 2, 2, 2. You will find that in some cases you can measure you will find intensity for the acoustic modes, and in some case you will find it only for the optic mode. Okay, and so you can do this. You will also need the mass of the 2 atoms, which we can assume in a convenient number. So you will require the mass, you will require the vector. Let me say that as the phonon eigenvector is concerned, for the acoustic modes, the eigenvector displacements are equal for the sodium and chlorine atoms, and for optic modes, they are opposite to each other. Okay, this I'm sure this you know easily. So you assume the eigenvector displacements equal for acoustic modes and unequal for the optic modes, and the direction of those displacements you need to take along the x direction for the longitudinal modes, and you can take perpendicular to this, let us say in the y direction for the transverse modes, if you like, which would be quite fine. Okay, so these problems, please do that, 3 of them. Now, the inelastic neutron scattering from polycrystalline samples we also discussed, and this we can use to determine the phonon density of states. Once it is a polycrystalline sample, it has a large number of grains or particles, which are oriented in different directions. So if it's a good, there is no preferred orientation, then all the orientation of the are available, and therefore what you will measure is actually an average over all the directions. So this is usually analyzed in what we call the incoherent approximation. What it means is the scattering itself is both coherent and incoherent, depending on the atoms that are involved. However, because we have now averaging over all the directions of the wave vector, so it becomes somewhat nearly incoherent, or in other words, incoherent approximation is a good approximation. So the scattering cross section will, or the scattering length will still be the whatever we have, namely the sum of the coherent and incoherent scattering terms. Okay, but the total is in the incoherent approximation. What it essentially means is that the term q dot xi, which is the wave vector dot product of the wave vector and the phonon eigenvector, can be simply replaced by 1 square xi square. Okay, so that takes care of the, and we also omit all the phase factors. So the scattering from each atom is treated as incoherent with that scattering. So the total scattering length you will use scattering length, which is root mean square of the coherent and incoherent scattering. Remember, it's root mean square of coherent and incoherent scattering. I had given the expressions in my regular lectures. Okay, so for the in the so-called incoherent approximation for a polycrystalline material, finally all the terms are removed. Essentially, of course, you still have the terms corresponding to the phonon population terms, and you have now not the individual phonons, but the phonon density of states. Actually, it's a partial phonon density of state corresponding to each atom, and then weighted by its corresponding scattering length square and divide by mass. Q square term is also there. The de Broglie factor is also there. So this is, you have a simplified version, expression which does not have the phase terms. Okay, so the phase is not there, and so the phase factor, once that is taken off and integrated over all the phonons in the beryllium zone, so is phase factors are removed, and there's an integral over all the phonons in the beryllium zone, which consequently gives you an effective density of states. So you can see that what we have measured here is not the true phonon density of state, but it is some kind of a weighted density of state, weighted by the scattering length squares and the de Broglie factors and divided by the masses. Okay, in fact, it becomes more clear here. So this is just written again, and we define what we call a neutron weighted phonon density of states, which is which can be written like this, and therefore and then all the remaining terms are taken out here. Instead of omega, I have written E here. E is equal to h cross omega. So what we actually derive from the scattering law, from the neutron scattering, is a neutron weighted phonon density of state, and where obviously the neutrons which have larger scattering lengths and smaller mass are going to contribute more, quite often contribute much more than many other atoms, typical oxides, including say high temperature superconductors or whatever, perovskites and so on. So well, that's how it is. But well, this you still get this picture. Okay, and we define, we calculate this neutron weighted density of state using the partial phonon density of states that you may get from lattice dynamics calculations, or even from molecular dynamics simulations. And there is always a problem about the de Broglie factor. These de Broglie factors are different for different atoms, and but experimentally when you're doing it, you don't know what the de Broglie factor of individual atoms in the crystal. So one takes some kind of an average number and then just does this calculation to derive the density of states. Okay, as if it's like a monoatomic lattice. So it is a problem. Of course, on the other hand, one can do a good calculation from lattice functional theory and obtain the number spectrum. The one phonon neutron spectrum can be measured by neutron scattering and compare the two. It was about multi-phonons. Okay, so in typical experiments, you would on a triple axis spectrometer, for example, you can make measurements at different values of the Q and then sum over. Okay, so you can keep, for example, the final energy and Q constant in a single run and measure it as a function of the incident energy, get the SQE for a large number of Q values, average them, and finally get the neutron weighted density of states. And Q square is, well, it is vector Q is Ki minus, so the magnitude square of Q is Ki square plus Kf square minus 2 Ki cos psi. Psi is the scattering angle, the angle between Ki and K. Okay. So this is the fourth problem. This is, okay, so let's assume that you have the phonon density of states in the energy range of 0 to 80 millielectron, range over which this function exists. Say, for example, this function 0 to 80 millielectron volts. What we are, the problem is to calculate what are the typical, what is the typical range of the wave vector Q over which the measurements can be made. Okay, obviously that has to depend on what the energy is. So what you will have to do is convert the energy. You need to choose appropriately what are the incident and final energies, and use this expression. You know, and get the value of Q. We had done this problem in one of the previous tutorials, and okay, you can assume some psi, which is maybe typically say 90 degrees if that is a problem. It will not change the order of magnitude of various numbers that you are interested in. Okay. And then there's a second part of the problem here. Assume that the direction is 0.01 angstrom square. So then I'm asking estimate the relative contributions of one phonon and multi-phonon intensity at the values of Q that you have chosen. Okay. The one phonon intensity is proportional to Q square U square, of course multiplied by the de Broglie factor, which is a constant, and the two phonon intensity is proportional to the same thing square divided by factorial 2. 3 phonon is the same thing cube divided by factorial 3, and so on and so forth. Okay, so whereas 0 phonon, which is elastic scattering, the corresponding number here is just 1. Then all of these are multiplied by the de Broglie factor, so that is a constant term for all of them, so you can ignore it as far as this is concerned, because we are only looking at relative contributions. So the relative contribution of the elastic scattering, 1 phonon scattering, 2 phonon scattering, 3 phonon scattering will be proportional to elastic proportional to 1. 1 phonon intensity is proportional to Q square U square. 2 phonon intensity is proportional to Q square U square whole square divided by factorial 2. Also. There is quite often there is some confusion about this factor of 3. So the mean square displacement about in all the 3 directions together is certain number. So if you want to have a number along only one of the directions, you need to divide by a factor of 3. Okay, so take Q square Q dot xi square, then you get a factor of 3 because of the direction. So this number is from one direction, and that is what counts here. Quite often people just use the symbol U square for the whole thing. So when they write U square, they mean only one direction. Whereas here, when I'm writing U square, I'm assuming the total mean square displacement of the atom, not just restricted to only one direction. Fine. So that is what it is. You, I suppose, don't need anything else here. Okay. All right. Then there is one more problem here. This is again a very interesting problem. This we had not done in the. So now the remaining 4 problems I will spend more time today. Okay. So the problem that we are looking at is assume that the phonon frequency of hydrogen atom in a solid is 20 terahertz. Okay, that's a good number for hydrogen frequencies. Now, if this is the case, then we need to calculate certain things. Calculate the value of the wave vector transfer Q, for which the neutron inelastic scattering intensity for a polycrystalline sample will be maximum at different temperatures. See, there are two things. See, the neutron inelastic scattering intensity will depend on the wave vector that we had already expressed, that this is the neutron inelastic scattering intensity. Okay, so it depends on the wave vector. It depends on the wave vector in 2 ways: Q square and the de Broglie factor. Okay, right. And of course, and in the problem that we just discussed, I'm just assuming that my phonon density of state is just a delta function at omega equal to 20 terahertz. Not omega, sorry, the frequency, not the angular frequency. Frequency equal to 20 terahertz. So it just assume, just take a delta function. So therefore, and there is only one atom. So therefore, this sum goes, it's just 1. There's a delta function. So, and these are energy dependent terms. Anyway, so if, as far as Q dependent terms are concerned, these are only 2 terms: Q square U square, 2W. Okay, so if that is the case, but the temperature is important because the U square is temperature dependent. Temperature will enter there, or even the frequency spectrum will enter, because the U, the mean square displacement is actually, work it out, it depends on the phonon population, and it is inversely related to the mass. Okay, along one particular direction. So you can use this expression if you like. I would suggest that you please verify this expression. Displacement is given by this term. This is just for a simple harmonic oscillator. What is the mean square displacement for a simple harmonic oscillator with the oscillator frequency of omega and the mass m? You would get this. So from u, you can calculate u square at different temperatures, and then the intensity is proportional to this. So once this is the case, you can find out what is the value of Q for which this intensity will be maximum. Okay, so that would be easy, and you can do it for 3 different temperatures. So that will give you an idea of what are the Q values for which the intensity could be maximum. In fact, it's a very interesting problem. If you make a measurement of the phonon density of states as a function of Q, and find out where the and what are the average energies of the phonons, then you can work what is the mass of the atoms that are contributing to that phonon density of states. So in its inverse problem, it's possible to get what is the mass of atoms if you have the full Q dependence at corresponding to each energy for that matter. Okay. I hope this is clear. You will, and this is a very simple term. This will be maximum when this term is equal to 1. That's also well known to you. Okay. The answer to this question, the Q would be will turn out to be the range of a few angstrom inverse. Yeah, and I'm sure you will not be confused by these units. Terahertz have to be converted into the proper angular frequencies and then used here. N is the phonon population term, which is just the Bose function, Bose-Einstein function. Okay. So far for the phonons. Now, elastic neutron scattering we did, and this stochastic motions again. This you have the elastic scattering, and the quasi-elastic scattering, that is scattering near around zero energy transfer, typically a Lorentzian function or a sum of a number of Lorentzian functions, or sometimes even Gaussian functions and so on. So these come from the stochastic dynamics of various kind of relaxation processes. And there is also an elastic term which comes from the time average structure, because even though unless it is a translational diffusion where there is no time average structure involved, because the atom could be diffusing anywhere in space. But if it's a localized translational motion, diffusion within a cavity or diffusion within a finite space, or if it's a rotational diffusion or reorientation of molecules, then there is a time average structure which gives you the elastic contribution to the dynamical structure factor. And of course, there is always a convolution by the instrumental resolution function. So the resolution should be appropriately chosen so that you are able to actually measure or able to see the Lorentzian functions, because these will be broadened by the instrumental resolution. If the instrumental resolution is too large, then this would become too broad and it will be difficult to fit it. On the other hand, if the instrument resolution is very small, then also you can find the Lorentzian if your energy range is consistent. So there are two things: the instrument resolution as well as the energy range of the measurement, so that you can you need both of them in such a way that you can measure a good part of the Lorentzian functions. Here again, we have both coherent scattering and incoherent scattering. Coherent scattering gives you the collective dynamics, so if there is any collective component in the stochastic process, it's possible. I mean, simply, for example, if you have a rotation of, then the the dynamics of different atoms belonging to the molecule are related to each other. There is because it's part of a rigid molecule. You can also have a collective dynamics even in case of diffusion if the diffusion of different atoms are correlated in any way. So that kind of detailed information can be obtained if you have a single crystal and you do make measurements as a function of the wave vector transfer, then it is possible to get that information. On the other hand, if you're looking at only a single particle dynamics, then incoherent scattering is a good method. However, see, there are certain atoms like hydrogen where the incoherent scattering cross section is very large. So it's so large that the contribution from other atoms, even if it is coherent or incoherent, will be small. So the incoherent scattering approximation is a very good approximation. And for other atoms, you may have both coherent and incoherent scattering. Even if it's a single particle dynamics, there is the coherent scattering as well. One has to see that in terms. Okay, so now if you have a sample again, then as we just studied in case of lattice dynamics, you can literally have an incoherent approximation, and so there is for any one mode of localized dynamics, you have this kind of a simple expression. One mode means only one of the type of stochastic dynamics, so that it will give you only one Lorentzian. So there is an elastic part and inelastic part, a quasi-elastic part, and the elastic component is called the elastic incoherent structure factor, which gives you detailed information about the spatial information or the geometry involved with the stochastic process or the localized dynamics. Okay, as I already said, if the dynamics is not localized, then you don't get the elastic term. However, you get the elastic term in coherent scattering in any case from the underlying structure. So if you have underlying structure which is a crystal, all the elastic contributions which arise at the Bragg reflections comprise of, if you don't do the energy analysis, then they have both the elastic and inelastic and quasi-elastic, everything at these two. But if you are doing the energy, then you get the Bragg reflections specifically at the elastic positions. So there will be huge, very large scattering at the Bragg reflections from coherent scattering, and there, whereas the quasi-elastic scattering coming from stochastic dynamics is a slowly varying term, relatively slowly varying term with respect to the wave vector, unlike the Bragg reflections, which is very sharply varying terms. And therefore, you just avoid the exact Bragg reflections, and there is no harm in losing very small portion of the reciprocal space around the Bragg reflections. You can use the rest of the reciprocal space to get the quasi-elastic scattering intensity. So that is for coherent scattering. Yeah, and this for crystals. However, there is a larger problem where you have an amorphous structure. Amorphous structure, the elastic term coming from the underlying lattice, even the lattice which is not taking part in stochastic dynamics. Okay, so there are all the other atoms which are not taking part in stochastic dynamics, still give you the coherent scattering at all the Q values, and so therefore in such cases you're not able to separate out this term, the elastic incoherent structure factor, because you have the all other atoms also contribute to the coherent scattering. So this will be a limitation. However, you can still get a lot of information from the remaining terms, as we showed during the previous lecture, that you can get the information about the geometry as well as the time scales from the quasi-elastic term alone. Okay, this is useful wherever it is possible to get, but okay, even this can be useful. And that we learned that in case of translational diffusion, whether it's a continuous diffusion or it's like the random walk kind of diffusion, or it is a specific fixed jump length diffusion or a Gaussian jump length diffusion, different models, it is possible to calculate the Lorentzian function and the corresponding what is the half width at half maximum as a function of the wave vector for that kind of a diffusion model. And okay, once you have the jump length and the residence time, the time between jumps, then the corresponding diffusion constant is nothing but L squared divided by 6 of tau, 6 tau in bracket. So this you can get. So it's important to know what is the model you use. These are three simple models which you just said: the fixed jump length model and the fixed Gaussian jump length diffusion model. And these are named after Chidley, Elliott, or Holland-Ross. This is a random walk diffusion model. Okay, so you will use this in the next problem. So the next problem is assume that there is a jump diffusion of solids, a jump diffusion of atoms in a solid with a typical jump length of say 3 angstrom. This is the typical you can get distance between the neighboring atoms or between an atom through which the atom can jump, and assume that the average residence time is 10 picoseconds. So these are the numbers given, and we need to estimate that if you know that, let us say from our molecular dynamics simulation or from by any other method means, then once I have this information, I would like to know that if I want to do the neutron quasi-elastic scattering neutron scattering experiment, then what is the range of momentum transfer Q and energy transfer E that I should have, and what is the resolution that I need. So if this information is available, how do I plan my neutron scattering experiment? I need to know what is the resolution. I need to know what is the range of values of the energy transfer and the range of values of the momentum transfer. So that's the problem. And so the hint is just use a jump diffusion model, because the problem is a jump diffusion. You can use any of these two. So you have here the value of the jump length and the value of the residence time are given to you. If these numbers are given, you can figure out what are the typical values of Q at which you should make these measurements. And if you know the tau, then you should also know if the residence time is known, then you should also know what are the energy transfers, which simply comes by the Fourier transform of this. Okay, so this will give you what is the. So if you know the value of the half width at half maximum of the, then once you know the half width at half maximum, you know what is the Lorentzian half width at half maximum, and therefore what are the energies. So from the say for example, if you find out that this is like say 0.1 milli-electron volt of the order of, it will turn out that your half width at half maximum of the Lorentzian function is of the order of 0.1 milli-electron volt or 100 micro-electron volt. Okay, that is a number. Then I should have a resolution which is obviously smaller than that. So instead of 100 micro-electron volt, I should have a resolution which is okay, a few tens at least of micro-electron volt will be the resolution, and the transfer you would need is at least some 2 to 3 times bigger than the range that you require is 2 to 3 times bigger than the half width at half max, in order that you can see the full Lorentzian function. So that would be numbers. That would be very easy. So you just use a jump diffusion model and work out the range of Q and range of E and the resolution of the measurements. In an actual experiment, you are also, apart from these, you are also concerned about what temperatures to use. But then the temperature requirement will be from your problem. What is the temperature at which you expect to observe the diffusion? So you have to make measurements at those temperatures. So as you can see, in planning a neutron quasi-elastic scattering experiment, you have to have a prior idea of what is the nature of dynamics you're looking at. And then so from other means, you should know what are the temperatures of interest and what is the wave vector transfer of interest, what is the energy transfer of interest, and what is the energy resolution. Once you have this information, you can plan a neutron quasi-elastic scattering experiment. As far as the amount of sample is concerned, this is a polycrystalline sample is what you would use here. The amount, I think I told you, typically we do an experiment such that we don't get a lot of multiple neutron scattering, and therefore we use the total neutron scattering cross section to find out what is the thickness for which you may have only 10% scattering. Okay. So what we often find is that if it's like a hydrogen material containing hydrogen atoms, then that thickness would be more like a millimeter or that order. It can be even smaller than that if your is a more dense material, more density of hydrogen. But typically in the range of a millimeter or less for hydrogenous materials, or it could be a few millimeters, maybe say 5 millimeters for other materials. So that is the kind of thickness of a sample you would use, which will give you a scattering, total scattering. You can actually calculate what is the actual amount thickness you should use, so that you get only around 10% scattering from a single scattering. Okay, and therefore the probability for a double scattering would be 10%, something like 1%, and that can be neglected. So I would like getting multiple scattering from my sample, which would confuse all the values of the percents. I do not want to have that. So the amount of sample that you actually use will correspond to using the total neutron scattering cross section. Total means coherent, incoherent, everything. Okay. Of course, you should not have much of absorption. That is besides the other important thing that you have to consider. But from scattering point of view, just about that, use the 10% of the total scattering, 10% scattering, and so that is the thickness of the sample. As far as the dimension of the sample is concerned, the height and width of the sample disk, for example, you may use a disk, corresponds to the neutron beam size. It's good to use a good part of the neutron beam size. Typical neutron beam size will be a few centimeters. If it's a very focused beam, it can be small, but it could be anything like, okay, it could be a few centimeters. I mean, depends. Sometimes you use just 1 centimeter, sometimes you use up to 4 centimeters. This is the typical dimensions of height and width, or the length and width, and the thickness would be a few millimeters. Okay. Now we come to the molecular dynamics simulation that we did in the last talk, last lecture. We look at a few problems from the molecular dynamics simulation for neutron scattering in particular. So I had mentioned that the simulation cell, you choose the number. The first thing you choose what is the system or the system of atoms that which you are going to calculate or simulate. Do the molecular dynamics simulation. So if it's a crystal, you would use a supercell of say N1 into N2 into N3 unit cells along the 3 crystallographic lattice vectors. And depending on these numbers, it will allow only certain wave vectors in the Brillouin zone, which are consistent with this supercell size. So larger the supercell, more will be the wave vectors for which the dynamics can be accessed, and you can actually, we didn't do that, but you can actually calculate the phonon dispersion relation at this mesh of wave vectors in the Brillouin zone, and using those phonon frequencies, you can calculate phonon density of states and a variety of things, very similar to what you do in with lattice dynamics. But as a function of temperature or pressure, that is something, including the effect of anharmonicity and so on. Okay. For an amorphous or structure or a liquid, you can use any convenient cell. You can start with an equivalent crystal cell and then heat it up, melt it to at very high temperature, and then cool it down to get an amorphous structure. That's a normal method that one uses. You also apply periodic boundary conditions to simulate infinite systems. So you apply periodic boundary condition on this cell, and then, or you may not apply periodic boundary condition if you're interested in just a cluster or in a nanoparticle. Partial periodic boundaries, if you're going to a surface or a thin film moment in that. In starting the simulation, in which you have a total of n atoms, that is a product of these three terms, n1 into n2 into n3 into the number of atoms within a unit cell. So capital N is the total number of atoms in this n1, n2, n3 unit cells. Okay. So for those atoms, you need, what you track is actually the positions, the velocities, and you need to calculate the accelerations to do the equations of motion, essentially the classical Newton's equations of motions for these particles, atoms. Okay, of course you have the masses of all the atoms also. So you need to do this. And then there's a typical algorithm called Berle algorithm. There are other algorithms possible, but the Berle algorithm is such that you can get the positions at time. If you know the position at time t and the time t minus delta t, and the acceleration at time t from the force field or from density functional theory, then you can get the position plus delta t. So this is a standard Berle algorithm. You can get the corresponding velocities and the accelerations. So there are other algorithms more complex than this one, but this is quite a popular one. And the time step in this calculation is determined by the fastest process in the system. So I should use a time step which is small enough so that I can observe the fastest process. But now, what is the fastest process typically in an atomic system is the highest frequency phonon. Okay, so even if it's an amorphous structure, you have, let's say, the highest frequency vibrational process which occurs in either the same structure or a similar crystal structure, which are you can get the same order of magnitude from any of the equivalent physics process, and you use a time step which is something like 20 times smaller than the time period of the fastest process. So if you have a fastest process corresponding to say 10 terahertz, then the period of vibration 0.1 picosecond or 100 femtoseconds, and so the time step could be something like smaller would be good enough for that example. Okay, typically people use a few femtoseconds, maybe 1 femtosecond is good, 2 is good enough. It could be, I mean, depending on the problem, one has to try it out and see what gives you consistent results, or the converging, not depending on the time step size. You need to use it. So it's good to do a few numerical experiments before you do a very long simulation, because simulations are very time consuming, take a lot of time even on the fast supercomputers, and therefore I would personally like to suggest you to do all numerical experiments with your simulation system to get a feel of what you have and to make sure that what you're calculating is reliable and consistent and convergent with respect to various choices that you make. Okay, having said that, okay, this again a very simple thing that we often monitor. What is the kinetic energy So it's good to monitor the total kinetic energy of all the atoms involved, which is sum of half mv squares. V is the velocity here, and so just sum over, and that this will have its inherent fluctuations of the order of 1 by root of n with time, because it's a finite system. But this quantity gives a good feel whether it is varying a lot or it's not varying. If it's the variations are smaller than this or around this or not much more than this, then you're okay. I mean, in the sense that you have a system in equilibrium. If not, then one has to see what exactly we are looking at. Okay, there's an ensemble average done, which is nothing but is essentially a time average of this this quantity. If you do a time average, then you average over these fluctuations, and as you already know, this will give you the average kinetic energy is nothing but the temperature multiplied by the Boltzmann constant and the number of degrees of freedom that are associated with it. Okay, every degrees of freedom, kinetic energy of half kT, and so if there are n degrees of freedom, then it is n by 2 kT. So the temperature, as you just said, if you have n atoms, then if there are 3n degrees of freedom, you need to subtract out the constraints. For example, 3 constraints because of keeping the center of mass of the system frozen. So in my supercell, I don't want the center of mass to move. So the center of mass is not allowed to move, and once you apply that constraint, the kinetic energy is reduced by that much amount. So it's half kT multiplied by the degrees of freedom. Okay, based on this, let's look at a problem now. In a molecular dynamics simulation, assume, so it's a very basic problem. We are just starting the simulation. So assume that the starting position of an oxygen atom is at origin. Okay, so start an oxygen atom at origin 0, 0, 0. So when I say oxygen, its mass is known to you, 16 atomic mass units, and the initial position is 0, 0, 0. Okay. So now I want to give it a starting velocity. See, as I said, velocities are related to the kinetic energies. So I'm interested in doing a simulation at 300K. So 300K is my average kinetic energy. But because initially the potential energy is 0, the atom is sitting at an equilibrium position. So all the kind of energy has to be kinetic. Give it a kinetic energy which is double of the average kinetic energy. So if the average kinetic energy is half kT per degree of freedom, I give it a full kT. So I wish to give a velocity or to this atom which is corresponding to an initial kinetic energy of 600 K. So please calculate what is the velocity for the oxygen atom so that it will have a kinetic energy corresponding to 600 K. Now, assume the direction of the velocity to be along x-axis. So I'm just simplifying the problem. You have an atom sitting at origin, and I want to just give it a kick along one direction, give a velocity along x direction. Then let me do this. Now, what is the time step I should use to simulate it? You easily notice I'm only trying to simulate a simple harmonic oscillator here. Okay, although its oxygen atom may be in a solid, but I'm just doing a molecular dynamics simulation of a simple harmonic oscillator. Start the atom at origin, give it a kinetic energy, and this simple harmonic oscillator is with vibration, the vibrations along the x-axis. So now what is the time step I should use? Okay, so I have given you the, I would assume that the vibrational frequency of this simple harmonic oscillator is 10 terahertz. Okay, please remember this is vibration frequency, not angular frequency. Okay, so the vibrational frequency is 10 terahertz, so that the period of oscillation is inverse of this, which is 1 by 10 of a picosecond. Okay, so you need to find out what is the time period, what is, so if you find a time period of 1/10 picosecond, then as I said, the time step should be chosen, which is say something like 20 times less than the time period. So from 100 seconds, I would choose a time step which is just 5 femtoseconds. I mean, you already the answer, but you please work it out how you get that number. So when you please do the assignment, please give your logic and see how you arrived at, although we have already discussed it here. So you get the initial velocity, you have the initial position, you have initial velocity, you have the time step, and you need to calculate the force. How to calculate the force? For the simple harmonic oscillator, its force is nothing but F equal to K minus KU. Okay, F and U, these are vectors, but our vectors are all in the x direction. And K is the force constant, and you already know that the frequency is equal to square root of K by M. So you already know the frequency that is given to you, therefore you can work out what is the force constant. But you please have to work it out in appropriate units. I would suggest you use the units, finally get numbers in the units of in the problem in angstroms for distance and picosecond or a femtosecond if you like for time, because distance and time are two quantities that you have to have the right. And then the problem is the following: find the position at 1 and 2. So at the initial step, initially it is 0, 0, 0, 0. After one time step, what is the new atom? And after two time steps, what is the new position of the atom? That's all you have to do. It's a simple harmonic oscillator problem, but you have to do it as if you're doing molecular dynamic simulation. And then, of course, the same thing, if you are able to do it here, can be done with the multi-atom systems. Okay, so I suppose this is clear. Okay. Next problem we'll try to look at corresponding to the diffusion process. So now, see, one of the things that we calculate in the molecular dynamic simulation is mean square displacements as a function of time. So you can here there is an averaging over the starting time as well. Typically, you can get a mean square displacement at any time by just taking the difference from the value at time t equal to 0. If you have the value at time t equal to 0 and then see what is the corresponding number time, the square, and we divide by the number of atoms and so on. But here we also wish to average it over the starting time also. So t starting time and tj plus tau is the time after time. Okay, you take the difference of the two, square it, and then average, sum over and average. Okay, so this is how you can get the mean square displacement. So these numbers, if you have, then so if you get u square tau, and then this would be linearly varying with the time tau, and with this linear relation, if you take the slope, you get the diffusion coefficient. So you can get the isotropic diffusion coefficient like this. You can also get anisotropic diffusion constants along various directions. So instead of 6 tau, then you divide by just 2 tau and so on. So along separate directions is what you can get the anisotropic diffusion coefficients. And there is another way you can get the diffusion coefficient also from the velocity autocorrelation function. We have done this. Okay. So now once you have these numbers, you can do this at a variety of as a function of temperature. So if you calculate the diffusion coefficient as a temperature, then you can try to put a Arrhenius relation to it. Means the assumption is that this is a diffusion process is an activated process with a net activation energy, and therefore its diffusion coefficient would follow this Arrhenius relation. You can take its logarithmic, just take a logarithm so that it becomes a linear relation, and so that it can be plotted. It's a certain constant number, in fact, you can easily see that this number would apply at if you have a very large temperature, then practically at infinite temperature, then you can end up with these zeros. That's the highest diffusion coefficient that's possible. Right now, we don't worry about it. It's just a prefactor as far as this is concerned, and you can get these numbers. So the activation energy, Boltzmann constant temperature. So this is a problem using this one. Now, let's assume that we have a jump diffusion model, a jump diffusion of atoms in a solid with average jump length of 3 angstrom and average resonance time of 10 picoseconds. But at this time, also giving a value of temperature. Given that, you can first of all calculate coefficient at that temperature. As we said, it's very simple. It's square divided by tau, and you get the diffusion coefficient. But now the problem is, so you got the diffusion coefficient at one temperature from these numbers. And let's assume that there's an activation energy for these jumps, which is half an electron volt. So if I have that activation energy, I know the activation energy, I know the value of the diffusion coefficient at one temperature, then I just like to calculate what is the diffusion coefficient at other temperatures. Okay, so if I have the value at one temperature, I need to just get it at other temperatures. And I have the slope of this relation, so I can work it out what is the from that. So I'm asking you to calculate the diffusion coefficient at two other temperatures, 900K and 1200K, how it would change. Okay, so far, so I've given 8 problems for this assignment. We have discussed all of them. And now, if you have any questions, we can. I haven't got much of feedback from you, but I could then discuss these problems as well as any of the other related matter in the lectures that we have so far given, because as far as this part of the course is concerned, it completes here. We might have another lecture on some other issues. In particular, we have not covered the inelastic neutron scattering or quasi-elastic neutron scattering from magnetic dynamics. You have the spin waves due to magnetic moments in a solid. So you can have spin waves which are again as a function of temperature, and which are excitations very similar to phonon excitations. Okay, so that's a little variant. The essential difference from phonons is that there are 2 or 3 main differences while studying spin waves is against lattice vibrations, and these are these ones. The phonon excitations, the neutron scattering cross sections depend on the neutron scattering length, the coherent neutron scattering length. Okay, and you also have incoherent neutron scattering lengths, which can give you single particle dynamics. However, the magnetic interactions are not with the but with the magnetic moment of atom that is involved, and therefore it's a large. Okay, so the scattering cross section would be more like with similar functional dependence as for X-rays, because X-rays are also scattered by the electron cloud. So it's a large size cloud, typically of the order of an angstrom, like nuclei, which are in the 1000 times. So 1000 or even Fermi, more like 1 Fermi meter. So it's several orders of magnitude. Okay, so 5 orders of magnitude. So the neutron scattering from nuclei is essentially all isotropic, whereas from the large atomic size, you have to be concerned. So there is a form factor, and the form factor varies similar to X-ray form factors, which decay with large wave vector, So larger the scattering angle, the less scattering. Okay, or larger the wave vector transfer. So similar to the X-rays for large wave vector transfer or large scattering angle, the intensity falls off purely from the form. So there is a magnetic form factor which comes from only the magnetic electrons. So it's different from the X-rays where all the electrons contribute. Okay, but all the same there is a form factor. So you will get magnetic experiments are therefore restricted to small Bragg angles, or not exactly small Bragg angles because it depends on what is the wavelength you use, but a small wave vector. Okay, difference. Second is so compared to phonons, in fact, we can separate the magnetic neutron scattering from phonon inelastic scattering by just using different values of the wave vectors. If you use small wave vectors, then I will preferentially get the magnetic excitations contributions, and for large wave vectors, I will get the phonon contributions. Also, the temperatures can be normally the spin waves you would look at in a magnetic structure, like a ferromagnetic structure or one of the magnetic structures where there are definite magnetic moments which you can excite, whereas high temperature structures, paramagnetic ones in particular, you may get some paramagnetic scattering, but then mostly you get the phonon contribution. So, okay, so if there is, then we will go into these aspects about, and also if you have a single crystal, you want to measure the equivalent of phonon dispersion curves. If you want to use measure the magnon or the spin waves excitations, then you have to appropriately apply magnetic fields to ensure and selectively choose the specific magnon dispersion or the specific magnons, just as we had processes how to choose specific reciprocal lattice vectors and the wave vectors, usual phonons. Similarly, for magnons also you can use the process. So what one does, that would be if we have another lecture in January, we'll discuss these things, and any questions if I receive from you, I can try to clarify there. Okay, so as far as this today's part is concerned, I've given you 8 problems. Those of you interested in getting the credits, kindly submit these, as Dr. Basu would tell you how to do that, and then we will be able to look at it.